Hi everyone. I would like to introduce Claire Michelsen and Ben Mincks. They're both amazing program specialists and facilitators at NCBI, which is next door. Ben Mincks is the founder and organizer of BRAD, which stands for Boys Respecting All Diversity. It's an after-school group for 4th through 8th graders exploring the pressures and messages that come with identifying as male. And Claire runs EPIC, which stands for Empowering People, Inspiring Change, and she has a background in psychology and women's and gender studies and sexuality studies, and she also has a background in sexual assault prevention and creating curriculums that have been implemented in, which high school is it?
Hellgate
High School. So, yeah, so you could give them more welcome.
Thanks everyone for showing up. Like I already said, my name's Ben, and I'm a program specialist at NCBI Missoula. If you don't know what NCBI is, we're a leadership development organization, and we do violence prevention and prejudice reduction work. We lead workshops all over the state. We do a lot of work with probably 60–70% of our work is in the schools, though, leading after-school groups like BRAD and EPIC. And then we also do trainings for businesses and organizations around cultural competency and leadership development. And we're really excited to be here today talking about a very important issue, one that's dear to my heart, around masculinity. And so I'll kind of just give my backstory on why I'm passionate about this, right? And then I'll let you introduce yourself. I grew up in Rapid City, South Dakota. I was a pretty typical boy. I used to be very emotional and would cry every time the Broncos lost. And I wanted to be a professional football player, and kind of saw that as my way to, fame and fortune. And quickly, as I got older, realized that wasn't quite a reality and kind of just this made-up thing I had in my head. But I think it's important to say that because I think doing a lot of work in the schools and working with young men, it's a lot of young men's dreams, and they have this kind of more narrow view of what it means to be a man. So with BRAD, we're kind of trying to expand the definition of what it means to be a man. And I'm really excited to be here talking about this. So,
Yeah, I think I really have become more interested in masculinity through my studies at UM. A lot of people, when I say I study women's gender and sexuality studies, they think, oh, women and LGBTIQ people, but men have a gender, and so there's a lot that goes with that construction of their gender, of male masculinity. So I think it's really important to start sort of helping raise our boys to be just more holistically healthy people. We have a lot of hard and harmful constructions being portrayed in our media and in our schools. So I think that's kind of where my passion lies, is just helping young people find healthier gender identities.
Yeah, so today we only have 50 minutes, unfortunately. So all of NCBI's workshops are experiential. We like to get people thinking and sharing and listening to each other, and we want to hear from you. So you're going to be just as important as we are in this. We're going to be kind of exploring some of our own messages that we receive around gender, and then we're going to go into some theory pieces and talk about masculinity in Missoula and Montana specifically, and then we'll end it hopefully on time, kind of thinking about next steps. So
Cool.
Get started. Oh, forgot that slide.
All right, so we always think it's good to start out with some definitions so we're all on the same page. Working this semester with our middle schoolers, we realized some of these definitions are really hard to explain or to come up with. So we have gender as refers to the socially constructed roles, behaviors, activities, and attributes that a given society considers appropriate for men and women, and also other gender identities. We have those same constructions. Masculinity refers to the behaviors, social roles, and relations of men within a given society, as well as the meanings attributed to them. And the term masculinity stresses gender, unlike male, which stresses biological sex. So it's more of a performance is what we're getting at, not like necessarily a biological inherent set of qualities. And then we have the word toxic masculinity, which is similar to the word hegemonic masculinity, if you've heard of that. So toxic masculinity is the socially constructed attitudes that constrict masculinity to violence, dominance, and emotional withdrawal.
Cool. And yeah, we think it's super important to start thinking about even just definitions and the language we use. Like Claire said, it's fascinating when you start to think about it. Like, I didn't start talking about gender until I was in college, and I think there's a huge gap there in the school system, and it's something that needs to be talked about, because right when you hit elementary school, there's already gender animosity right away, and young people just get bombarded with messages all the time, even before they hit school. But yeah, so we're gonna get thinking about kind of our own genders and what are the strengths and challenges that come with that, and then what are the messages that you received about other genders. So maybe just talk to your neighbors, get to know each other a little bit. It's a little quiet in here. So yeah, talk about your strengths, your challenges, and then the messages you received about other genders.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm Nancy.
All right, well, you wrap up your last thoughts. Does anyone have any thoughts that you want to share? Typically, we like to ask that you share for yourself and not for other people, because they might not want to share in a bigger space. But anything that you guys talked about that you would want to bring to the group?
What are some of the strengths and the challenges?
Yeah.
I feel like there aren't tons of defining strengths based on gender, except for one that I feel deeply, and that's, as a woman, the ability to give birth to another human being. And I think that that is the greatest strength that a woman has, that unfortunately a male will not have. But what goes along with then being a strong or assertive or vocal woman can then become sometimes your greatest challenge in stereotypes, because opposed to being a leader as a male, you are a bossy, bitchy female.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about how women are, for kind of like femininity, it's okay to show like a variation of emotion or a lot of emotional range, but then also one of the challenges is those emotions not being taken seriously, or just in general not being taken seriously as a woman. Yeah.
So we kind of talked about like I'm 40, and so growing up, my generation of boys is just on the heels of the women's rights movement. So there's this, like, we were taught how to support the women in our lives because that was the topic. But there's a missing piece in that our roles are defined as these adult men, right? And so I think we had a great job of how to, support a gender, but like Elke said, not the generation. So now we're sort of this pendulum swing, and it's really unclear of like, how do you, what is your role as a male gender in a relationship with a female? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, the thought that I had was that, in thinking about women, is that what the messages that I've heard about what some of the strengths are of being women, like they're nurturing, caretaking, sensitive, relational, et cetera, is that those strengths can also be then flipped over and seen as weaknesses when applied to men, or just still applied to women in certain situations. Whereas on the opposite end of that, I don't feel like that happens as much with men. That what are viewed as strengths as men get turned into weaknesses when it's applied to women. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's really interesting.
To the messages you receive. So I have 2 boys, and I was struck how almost immediately they were receiving messages from really progressive people we know about how they are going to be aggressive, and they sexualize little boys like immediately, like a little stud, and keep him away from my daughters. And my boys are very confused, like, what did I do wrong? And then they're somehow kind of not allowed to question that, because there's been a sort of like you can't question that without sounding like you don't like feminism or women, or and so they're really silenced in their confusion.
Yeah.
And just kind of like to follow what Katie was saying, where, strengths are viewed as weaknesses if they're from like the opposite sex, or whatever. But I think it's the issue with having to define roles and having to box them and trying to, fit it in one space instead of just allowing, these strengths to be able to be fluid.
Yeah, I think one of the most damaging sort of words we use is opposite sex, because I don't think that we're opposite. I think that we're a lot more similar than we are different. And I think when we pose each other as opposites, then one quality gets sort of taken by one gender and the other, and it's sort of one has to be better than the other. And so I think that strike that term from the list.
It's so interesting how damaging just a social construct like this can be, because gender is super fluid, right? But when you get boxed in and feel constricted to that you have to, adhere to these certain standards of what it means to be this gender that you're identifying as, it gets super dangerous, and we're gonna go more into that as we go along. But thanks for sharing, everyone.
Yeah.
It's great hearing from everyone.
Okay, so you can leave it for, oh, you're good. So I have this picture. It's a Dolce & Gabbana ad. They're such great ads, really. So it says what we imagine our constructs of masculinity to look like. So this is sort of the epitome of all of those stereotypes and attributes that we put for really masculine males. I would say even if they were showing more muscles. And so that's what we imagine this sort of like glorified version of masculinity to be like. But what I think that it really looks like, these are the mass shooters, several of them in our country. And I think that, at least I draw the connection of this hyper masculinity straight to the glorification of violence, the feelings of inadequacy that we really channel into all of our boys, because you can really never be this unless maybe you're Donald Trump. And we all could agree that he's maybe not the most emotionally healthy person. And so I think that it's really important to remember and to start working on these deconstructions with people that this really isn't what these terms of masculinity looks like. It's really actually damaging. And so I have a couple sort of examples of qualities to demonstrate that. Ben, do you want to click for me? So what do these masculine qualities really mean? So strong. What that really means is you can't be vulnerable. You can't have any weaknesses. You must never be sad or cry.
And just like you were saying, like, on the moment boys are born, they're getting, you know, these messages thrown right at them.
So powerful. You must dominate all other people in order to be deemed successful. Uses violence and coercion to do so. Built, like muscle. Must obsess over body, have huge muscles, and work out excessively to be attractive. We know that it's not just women who suffer from eating disorders. Aloof. What that really translates to is can't have or show emotions, even excitement or joy. So it's not just sadness. Really the only emotion, I'd say, the only couple emotions men are sort of accepted for showing are indifference and anger.
Mm-hmm. And that sounds really interesting and hits close to home for me because that was me in high school, just like super aloof. I was super confused and didn't identify as a hypermasculine man, but you know, also didn't identify as super feminine, and kind of just rejected it all and just felt like confused in my head and, you know, with no language or education to know what to do with it.
Mm-hmm. And I have provider. Sole purpose in family and relationships is to provide economic support instead of love and emotional support. And that, I think, is really damaging. I think, yeah, you can see it play out in a lot of our sort of constructions of relationships too. And so our sort of conclusion, I also wanted to add ladies' man because that also translates into, you know, first has to be heterosexual to be a man and has to dominate women or be sex obsessed, even, you know, if you really aren't feeling that. And so all of these qualities seem like compliments and they seem really good, but our point is that they're really being used to pressure boys and men into fitting these really unhealthy roles. And so even though we think, you know, we might be boosting someone up by telling them they're so strong or powerful or, you know, they're so muscular, it can actually be really damaging.
So we're gonna watch, earlier, about a month ago we showed this film. We're just gonna watch the trailer. It's a movie called The Mask You Live In. Has anyone seen Misrepresentation? Yeah, it's from the same makers as Misrepresentation. I remember the first time I watched Misrepresentation, I felt like I got kicked in the stomach. You know, it's in your face, showing how sexism affects women. And so after the director made that, she got all these comments like, what about the men? Like, what are we doing with our boys? So she decided to look into that and make a documentary about it. And so we'll just watch the trailer. It's a really good movie. I think it's still on the tour premiere circuit, but once it comes out, I really highly recommend you seeing it.
So it's not out yet?
It's not out yet.
No, we're hoping to do another community showing.
We're talking about doing another community showing, maybe at one of the high schools. So if we have a sign-up sheet back there, if you're interested, we can get you on the list and in the know.
Stop crying. Stop with the tears.
Don't cry.
Pick yourself up. Stop with the emotions.
Don't be a pussy.
Don't let nobody disrespect you.
Be cool and be kind of a dick.
Always keep your mouth
Nobody
shut.
likes a tattletale.
Bros come before hoes.
Don't let your woman run your life.
You bitch. Get laid. Do something. Be a man.
Be a man.
Grow some balls.
The three most destructive words that every man receives when he's a boy is when he's told to be a man.
We've constructed an idea of masculinity in the United States that doesn't give young boys a way to feel secure in their masculinity. So we make them go prove it all the time.
Within their peer group culture, each of them is posturing based on how the other boys are posturing, and what they end up missing is what they each really want, which is just that closeness.
In good times, guys are like really close to each other, but when things get a little bit worse, you're on your own.
From middle school, I had 4 really close friends. Once I kind of went into high school, I struggled finding people I can talk to because I feel like I'm not supposed to get help.
Our kids get up every morning. We have to prepare their mask for how they're going to walk to school. A lot of our students don't know how to take the mask off. What is it you don't let people see? Almost 90% of you have pain and anger on the back of that paper.
If you never cry, then you have all these feelings stuffed up inside of you, and then you can't get them out.
They really buy into a culture that doesn't value what we feminized. If we're in a culture that doesn't value caring, doesn't value relationships, doesn't value empathy, you are going to have boys and girls, men and women go crazy.
I had anger issues in high school. I felt like an outcast.
I've been suspended at least once every year I was here. We would just look for trouble and just like try to fight.
Boys are more likely to act out. They're more likely to become aggressive. Most people miss that as depression or see it as a conduct disorder or just a bad kid.
I felt like just giving up on life. You know, I actually had suicide thought to my head in 6th grade.
I felt alone for a long time, and I actually thought about killing myself.
Whether it's homicidal violence or suicidal violence, people resort to such desperate behavior only when they are feeling shamed and humiliated, or feel they would be if they didn't prove that they were real men.
If you're told from day one, don't let nobody disrespect you, and this is the way you handle it as a man, respect is linked to violence.
If I can man up, why step down from that, you feel me? It's like instinct.
So man up, man up, man up, man up. What's a fucking ball? Act like a man.
Be a man.
For my kids, I was gonna end this hyper-masculine narrative here.
All right. So, where do we see toxic masculinity in Missoula, Montana? I just came up with a few statistics, just quick searching around. If you start looking at the statistics, it's really frightening. 70% of all crime in Missoula is committed by men. 76% of all violent crime in Missoula is committed by men. Of the violent crime, 99% of convicted rapists are men. 81% of completed suicides in Montana are men. And that right there, I think, is one of the most glaring statistics, how we are failing to connect with men and boys in our society. Because women actually attempt suicide 3 times more than men, but men complete suicide at a much higher rate. So, you know, they're all calls for help as I see them. Yeah, we need to figure out how to engage men. And then growing achievement gap, it's really hard to get statistics in the schools. A lot of schools don't even measure by gender. All the schools we go into, we constantly hear from teachers and administrators how there's this huge growing achievement gap between the men and the women in their schools, and it's scaring them. We have teachers coming up to us telling us that they just have to have lower expectations for the guys because they don't think the guys are, they wouldn't be able to pass unless they didn't. Things like that, where it kind of just proves all of these messages that boys are receiving and how constrictive it is being in the male gender box. It's damaging, and it's having a real effect on our society.
Yeah.
And in this next activity, we're going to kind of go into talking about oppression. And when you start thinking about oppression, men are often the agents of oppression, and often the agents of a lot of harm in our society, right? So we'll get into that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add with the achievement gap, I just sort of try and imagine just like the messages that boys get about how to be successful and whether or not those fit with a school setting. And I think a lot of times we're not really teaching our boys to value what can really bring them success in their lives.
Yeah, and I mean, when I was in, I'll use another personal example. When I, somewhere, I think it was 5th grade, I just kind of stopped caring about school. All I cared about was sports. My sister was really good at school, and I kind of wanted to be the opposite of my sister. So I just started devaluing school because I saw it as feminine. And I saw people who were good at school getting bullied and picked on, especially the boys that were good at school. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes against what we might think. It's kind of seems like it's been a cultural shift recently since women sort of joined the educational setting. Are kind of those expectations have definitely kind of switched.
Yeah, and does anyone have any others to add to where you see toxic masculinity in Missoula?
Well, one of the reasons why I'm here is because I've got a 6th grader who has sort of become a bit of a scapegoat for things that go wrong in the classroom, in part because he's competitive and active and anxious to be the first one done, and smart and athletic, and so it's kind of working against him at the moment. The things that he sees are naturally good about him, and it's, you know, the reasons for getting in trouble are confusing. He doesn't see himself as being bad or hurtful, and so it's interesting. And there's been a little bit of a history about it at the school with boys like him, so I'm hoping to kind of end the trend of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, like, before kids go to school, they've already been socialized really differently, so that girls are more encouraged to do kind of like quiet tasks, not be as rough and tumble and active necessarily. But within our society's constructions, that's typically how they're socialized, and boys are really more encouraged to be kind of like rough and wild and loud, and then when they get to school, shit, that's not good. They're not used to any of these rules, and I think, not to say that, you know, the rules of schools are in any way supportive of our young people. I think they're often too constricting to be asking our kids to be still for so long and to be quiet and just sort of listen to a teacher all day. But I think that girls are just socialized to be better at it, which is not their fault or boys' fault, but it's kind of our fault collectively.
You see a lot in schools, especially like elementary school, that if, in particular, if a little boy gets in trouble, they're trying to figure out what their currency is, right? So often they take away recess, which then just like
makes it worse.
Makes it a million times worse because they already have short recesses, and so then they lose recesses for being so rowdy. And you're like, actually, you should just make him go run around the building 10 times and come back to class or something. But
It's
it's
like having a new puppy.
Yeah.
And not letting them go for a run. You're going to have a monster on your hands.
Yeah.
It's such an archaic system and environment. And it is, I think, lends itself to the feminine gender just by the nature of wiring. And it's what I've noticed. And our sons are in the same class, and I've been in there all week, and there's bouncy balls, and I'm like, thank God, like just hooray, something to try to liberate a different way to be able to be in that classroom. And I think boys tend to get a harder run of it in the current system of schooling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, I work in corrections, and I work with men who commit violent crimes, often than not. And, you know, the interesting thing that I see happen when I think about crime and violence is that they're often victims of crime and violence, and especially in their youth. But even in their relationships that they have with others, and they also perpetrate it, so I'm not apologizing for what they've done, but they often, when I point out to them their own abuse cycles and the abuse that they've experienced, they don't recognize it, and they don't report it, and they don't speak up, because for a man to say that he's been beat by his girlfriend or his wife is very emasculating, and they don't, which then of course reinforces their own permission to do the same back to her because she hit him and she started it, and it's really complicated and really yucky. But I see it a lot with the men who I work with, that they're often victims of the same crimes, and there's a code that you don't talk about it, and you don't acknowledge that you were beaten, and you don't say anything, because then you would be weak if you allow those things to happen, which then reinforces again their right to perpetuate violence and hurt others. So I think it's an interesting, when I think about like percentages of crime and what I know about crime in my own kind of anecdotal world, I don't have stats on it, is that it's often underreported, especially if it's perpetrated by women. That there's this double standard that happens, and women aren't as held accountable for violence.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
You see that even in little kids, where like a lot of the boys are taught never to hit a girl, but the girls can kind of wallop on them, and sometimes those girls are even like, "Go girl," you know, and it's like, wait a minute, this little boy's just like, I don't know what to do, you know, and embarrassed to report it or tell them.
Because they got beat by a girl?
Yeah.
That's not okay.
Although I will say and counter that, I have a daughter and a son, and my daughter's older and she's pretty feisty. The people in here that know her, that apple didn't fall far from the tree. And she often holds her own against the boys that are picking on her on the playground and doesn't seek help. But when she retaliates, they immediately run and tattle on her. And so it's actually a reverse thing that's happening, and that's really a common problem. Our school, it's interesting, kind of different, but analogous in a way. And I find that, so I'm glad that the boys are asking for help, and I keep trying to tell my daughter, why don't you ask for help before you retaliate, because that's really not a good decision. But I think that what we're seeing is this pendulum shift. We've worked so hard to tell our girls to stand up for themselves, right? So now they're not asking for help, they're standing up for themselves, they're going for it, whatever, and then it isn't in all instances, but in here, and she's not the only one this is happening to, then they're getting in trouble. I think that that's not what we're talking about specifically, but it is interesting to see, because, you know, a pendulum is that. It doesn't find its center point for a while, and in some ways I'm glad to see that it's shifting to the point where the boys are actually asking for help, and I feel bad for my daughter, she needs to make a different decision, but it's just interesting to point out.
Yeah.
You said something about where do we see, what was the question you asked? Toxic masculinity. Without talking about like the Grizzly football team specifically, I think it'd be interesting to just talk about sports in general, because I think that I see that as being a place that's either very uplifting and where boys and girls on mixed competitive teams, or just boys either really rise up and find good camaraderie and good sportsmanship, or it's totally toxic.
Yeah, sports are a very powerful tool of really educating young people and sort of building, you always think like, oh, sports builds character. But what kind of character? I think it can be a really great tool for us, but I think it can also be a detriment when we're teaching boys to be so competitive, and I think it's really like we were talking about how it's really one of the only outlets that men are encouraged to seek in their lives, and that can be damaging.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, like, working in the schools. We had a conversation just the other day with one of our B-Rad groups. One of the boys is super into football and very athletic, and he was talking about his friends, and then he was talking about someone who didn't play football, and we asked him, we were like, so what are your perceptions of people who are like boys who don't play sports? And he's like, well, for the longest time I just thought they were weirdos, like all boys play sports, like that's just a given, right? We're like, no, not at all. And often sports, you know, like sports aren't bad, they can be great, but it often, if they are perpetuating these messages, then they can be really destructive.
Not that, I just listening to people talk about sports, I was a computer science teacher at a high school for a while, and I always thought it was kind of similar, that I couldn't get women in my classes. I just could not get girls to take computer science classes. And the ones that did were perceived as being very brave. I would hear other faculty talk about how, oh, she's so brave, she's the only girl in the class, kind of stuff. And I the whole time I just shook my head thinking, this is ridiculous. Somebody is telling these girls not to come here. And I always thought it was very much like sports. I don't know why, but I always equated it with the same kind of thing that was, you know, sort of chalking out different areas where certain genders were supposed to go that made no sense. But you know, it's the listening to people talk about sports, I was sitting there thinking, that sounds kind of like studying computer science in high school.
Yeah, no, totally. It's easy. It's interesting how they can just be flipped onto other things.
Yeah, it's definitely powerful stuff.
Alright, move on.
Yeah. So we sort of to illustrate how this all works as a cycle, we're going to talk about the system of the cycle of oppression. And so we're going to start by walking through what we would label sort of the non-dominant group, so the oppressed group, which we're going to have be women. And then we're going to, after that, we're going to walk through, we typically don't take non-dominant groups through the cycle because we don't think they are an oppressed group, but they do experience discrimination and oppression in some ways. So I just like to clarify that so everyone's not like, what, men aren't oppressed, why are you doing this? But so we'll start with women. Do you want to scribe for me, Dan? Yeah. Cool. So the first part of the cycle of oppression is misinformation. And so this comes from missing information, stereotypes, really limited interactions. Maybe you don't spend that much time with women in this case. And those records of those messages that just sort of play, even if you don't, you know, consciously support them or believe them, we can call up stereotypes, which we're going to do right now. So, what is misinformation that you hear about women?
Like they're emotional?
Yeah.
They're irrational?
Yeah.
They're whores?
Yeah.
Keep going. Like, I hear it all day long.
Yeah, there are a lot. So yeah, definitely we encourage you not to censor yourself. We won't judge you. We know that you might not believe this about women. This is misinformation.
No logic.
What?
No logic.
No logic.
They're not good at math or science. Right.
Not good at math or science.
They're cute, they're dumb.
Bitchy, bossy, bad with money.
Yeah. Busking you right then.
What? Did you say busty?
That's like,
yeah,
Bit-
basket, right. Oh.
Bitchy, bossy.
Bitchy, bossy, bad with money.
Mm-hmm.
Only concerned with money.
maybe impulsive. Like,
yeah. Only concerned with like
Money.
Gold diggers.
Gold diggers, that's the word. Incapable. Materialistic, is that what you're saying?
Well,
Yeah.
I think as a boy too, growing up in like a matriarchal household, that like that the women had all the information. That's where you needed as a man to find your more emotional support, which is pretty bad misinformation, because you got to find it yourself, or even through your own male friends, you know.
Women had all the control. And manipulative.
All right, so for time's sake, we're gonna keep moving, but look how many of these stereotypes we came up with just like that. So misinformation, all these stereotypes and records are really powerful. So from all this, we sort of transform that into mistreatment. So we use all of this information to excuse systematic mistreatment. So segregation, isolation, targeting, devaluing. So these would be examples of ways that we systematically mistreat women.
Tell them how to dress.
To do with the reproductive system.
Yeah, pay them
Sorry,
less.
that might be the next.
Yeah. Also, I hear a lot from the girls I work with that they're not allowed to play football in the
So
at
exclusion
recess. Yeah.
from sports.
There's
And we
like
had
double
pay them
standards.
less.
Yeah, if you dress sexy, you want sex.
So
Street harassment.
street harassment.
Opinions discounted.
They're just objectified a lot.
Control.
I would add violence in general, sexual violence and other forms of violence.
Exploited.
All right, so then this mistreatment becomes normalized in our society and turns into societal justification and institutionalization. So it makes its way into our institutions and like our laws and our policies and our sort of systems of belief and our constructions of gender. So what are ways that this mistreatment and misinformation gets institutionalized?
Gender pay gap.
Greater victimization of women.
A lot of times, like in the classroom, it just makes it easier for the teacher to segregate the two genders. So just for like convenience sake.
Yeah, so segregation.
Yes.
Fewer women political leaders.
Yep. Anything else?
I would say that's an institutionalization of power, defining power, as if it has some actual basis of gender. But that's an interesting, politics is an interesting place that gets institutionalized.
Yeah, definitely.
Dress codes also.
Yeah.
Dress codes. Oh my gosh.
Also, like not just lack of representation, but like how women are represented. I don't know how to phrase that.
Yeah, just representation.
That you only get hired if you're cute.
The media is still definitely a huge problem.
Yeah, so
Media
emphasis
portrayal.
on media representation.
The court systems of having to prove, through victim shaming and through all of those things. That's an institutional situation at this point.
So victim blaming.
Yeah.
So all of these these things leak into our systems and start to shape our culture and our society. And then all of this comes around back to women, who then experience internalization of that oppression. And so that's taking in all those messages and acting upon the stated or implied messages about our own groups. So how do women internalize all of this?
I'm not pretty.
Not
Enough.
underperformed.
Mm-hmm. Not enough.
There's infighting.
It breeds a sense of hostility and competition between or among women.
Mm-hmm.
Don't speak up for fear of being discounted.
Mm-hmm.
You can also be overly apologetic.
Mm-hmm.
I think it also affects negatively girls' and women's relationships with one another, kind of pinning them. It can pin them against one another and make it sort of a competition for men's approval, or yeah.
I think it also does switch in the way that men can take out their confusion about gender roles on women. I think women do the same on men sometimes. Well, I mean, I guess they do. But it's not as an internalization, like it hurts your relationships with
Right.
men.
Mm-hmm.
So idolize men, maybe? Yeah, so I think that's a good list. So you can see how this sort of gets to be a cycle, because now women are acting on all of these ways that they have internalized their oppression, and it just leads to more misinformation, because people, start to say, well, I know this one chick and she was not good at sports, or we start to become what we believe that we are. And so it just sort of keeps going in this cycle unless we break it, which we'll talk about after we walk the dominant group through. I can do that if you want to start talking.
Okay. Sweet. So how does this look for the dominant group? Like I said earlier, men are often the agents of oppressions and in power positions, but men also experience stereotypes and misinformation towards our group. So what's some of the misinformation and stereotypes about men?
Aggressive.
Aggressive.
Unemotional.
Yeah. Sexual conquistadors.
Strong.
Don't care.
Handy. Probably in two ways.
The kind of the man of the house, like they have to be. The decider. Wear the pants. Who are the pants?
The decider, the provider.
Yeah, the breadwinner.
The breadwinner, yeah.
Yeah, breadwinner, I guess that would.
Yeah.
Yeah, why don't they say who wears the dress?
It's you, Paul.
Sure.
Looks good.
Don't cry.
Okay.
Maybe that they have certain attitudes regarding women that they may or may not actually harbor.
So, would you like me how misogynistic would that sum it up, or?
Yeah, I mean, in general, the conversation seems to be a little bit about how men are this way, and I'm just not sure that every man would agree with your diagnostic of how we all are, supposedly.
Yeah, totally.
sort of entrenched in this toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
So it seems like there's an opportunity to maybe embrace some of those more traditional masculine values without also being involved in toxic masculinity.
Yep.
I don't,
Totally.
you guys are kind of presenting them as mutually exclusive. I don't know that they are.
Yeah,
That
and
makes sense.
that's not by, that's not on purpose, I guess. We're not meaning, we're definitely hitting on the negative parts, but we're gonna talk about more of the positive stuff and how to. It's all about. I see it as just being more human, and getting men to understand that we don't have that there is more to being a man than just all this negative stuff, because this is really heavy and really depressing. Right?
Well, but it's the same as like what we just did with the women.
Yeah.
Like we all said all these things, but that's not what we were thinking.
Yeah,
women,
exactly.
We think women are. We're talking about the misinformation right here.
Yeah.
Well, that does bring up a good point probably on both sides, like just assuming that men are these things. So the I think, did you write overgeneralizing?
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, this is
That's
stereotypes and
great.
misinformation, right?
Well, right, because it's not bad to be strong, but it's bad to assume that something's
Yeah.
strong because
This isn't our list of what men is. This is our list of misinformation about
exactly.
men.
Yep.
Yeah, or stereotypes, which is overgeneralizing qualities about a person or a
Yeah.
group.
All right,
For the
we'll
next.
move on. So, how does all this misinformation turn into mistreatment?
False expectations of, like, performance,
Mm-hmm.
whether that would be academic or wage or sports, just maybe bar way too high or bar way too low, depending on what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming that men don't need emotional support.
Yeah. That's a statistic in the clip that we showed. About 50% of maybe don't seek emotional.
Yeah, or even the mistreatment would be denying men emotional support.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you fall and scrape your knee, and if you're, I like to think I treat both my kids the same, but I've seen plenty of people where the daughter gets help and the boy's told to just brush it off and suck it up.
That's a huge one. I went to my friend's son's soccer game a few months ago, and a bunch of, they're still in elementary school, and a bunch of them got hurt. There's like probably one kid getting hurt every 20 minutes or something, and they'd come off just crying, and then there's all these people on the sideline, just like trying to encourage them not to cry, like, oh, tough it out, man, you can do it, you're all right, oh, you don't have to cry,
Well, I think you deny that support because there's just an assumption that we don't want it.
Yeah.
So that's
Exactly.
I think bullying is a big.
Yeah, bullying.
I think just sort of the idea of like giving up on, like, not trying to
Lowering
hold,
the standards.
like not trying to hold people accountable to the capacity they have to do certain things, like communicate their emotions. And
Well, that's just how a boy is.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just boy, there's a
Boys will be
dismissive-
boys.
Boys will be boys, dismissive. No.
I think there's also a feeling like if you are a guy, then if you get any girl, you're kind of lucky because all these different girls have all these different ways of being beautiful. And for guys, it's like there's a lot more judgment and comparison. Like, this guy makes more money, this guy's more handsome, and there's like a lot more blunt consideration of like what you want to end up with in your life, more than so like, who is this person that I'm spending time with?
Right.
Mhm.
So also some objectification.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sexualization of them too.
Yeah.
I think we missed in misinformation. I think we missed that men are seen as simple.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely. As symbol.
Simple.
Yeah.
Simple.
They don't have all those emotions.
So often, like, men are portrayed as sort of buffoon
Yeah.
characters.
Like a
in
caveman.
media and
Yeah.
things, and-
It's funny, it even like sinks down into like when you think of like our reproduction, like a lot of people are like, oh, like women's parts are so complicated, but really like comparatively, like our anatomy, like each has intricate structures.
We just leave a seat and go, it's pretty easy.
Yeah, so I think that like that's a good example of about how we sort of like write these stories that aren't always accurate.
It's very minimizing of men and their role in a family and a role in treating life and things like that.
I mean, our role is to provide, like you were saying. That's what we're told. And then if you don't, I mean, there's so much value placed on how much money do you make for your family. And I think there's the source of a lot of adult suicide in males, is that they aren't meeting the expectations of being a provider.
Yeah, exactly.
Pressure, I mean, would fall under mistreatment is
Yeah.
pressures.
Yep.
I'm gonna add violence up here too.
For the sake of time, we're just gonna cruise through the rest of this. We could just go on and on.
Yes. I'm gonna stay on
So
this.
how is this institutionalized in laws, policies, practices, institutions?
Different sentencing for men.
Different sentencing. I mean, you just look at men and women jails. Women's jails tend to be more humanistic, and there's more emphasis on, after giving them support and emotionally, and giving them more support after they're out.
The tendency of the courts to always give the child to the mother in separation situations.
Mm-hmm.
I think the history of the, men in the military, the sort of like viewing of men as disposable.
I think that there's also just a lack of programmatic things for boys in their self-esteem. Or opportunities to explore that, like the GUTS program for girls is great, but there really isn't that for boys right now.
I think there's B-Rad now, which I was like.
But that's in one school.
No, but I was
you know
like-
what I'm saying? It's like, I think we're really having to play catch up right now.
Yeah, we're definitely.
Yeah.
Well, and in this same part on the women's cycle, we were talking about how like women don't get the promotion, or there's the pay gap, or other like
Parental leave.
job roles that are. On the flip side, it's also a false assumption to just assume that the man is the right candidate. Like it's just not necessarily making. I think that's negative. That institutionalization is negative for males as well.
To use your word, I think that some of the scapegoating that happens with trouble in schools is an institutional response to a lot of this misinformation.
Also, a lot of sexual violence against males is dismissed.
Let's see. Get on to internalization.
Yeah. So, how do men internalize all these messages?
I'm not enough.
Yeah, not enough. Angry. Aggression, yeah.
Confused, suicidal.
Suicidal.
Feeling like you need to prove something.
Constantly feeling like you need to prove something.
I think a lot of young men feel like they don't have a choice when it comes to sex. Like the option to say no, I don't think is available.
Focusing more on job and career than self and family.
Narcissism.
False entitlement.
Hide emotions.
Yeah.
And fear. They're really afraid to do the wrong thing.
Substance uses. Yeah.
That's a huge problem as well.
Yeah.
Depression.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. As you can see, just like the non-dominant group, the cycle just is spinning out of control. So, how do you all think we can break this cycle?
Talking about it?
Talking about it.
By not calling one dominant and the other non-dominant.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
Language.
Yeah.
in programming and educational and trying to take our education system and integrating more emotional intelligence and permission. But, you know, but the cycle is already there, and I saw the same thing with kids in sports and boys brush it off, and it's dads. You know, I'm telling the mom, like, he needs a hug and he needs to cry it out and then he'll be fine. But the dads are like, oppress, brush it off. So there's something that we can't quite catch yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We need adult men to be mentors and help break this cycle.
Even just this exercise is really great though, because I go to tons of women's programming, and there's always a missing piece to the conversation, which is this next loop that you guys just even took us through of like, let's talk about this part of it. So just bringing the whole spectrum into the conversation about empowerment or violence, or you know, like it's great.
Well, I think too, like we talk a lot about like for a lot of women's issues, like the importance of having male allyship, and I think it's really hard for men if they're feeling like, look how much we're struggling too. It's hard for them to sort of like feel like they have the capacity to be an ally, and so I think we really need to validate a lot of these issues that are affecting men too, if we want to sort of work together to break down these constructions and work on these issues.
One thing we didn't bring up in the internalization too, and I know you're trying to move on, but I realize seems really big in Missoula is men wanting to numb out because they're not supposed to be allowed to show emotion, or they're supposed to be aloof, or right, so they're trying, and then like with drugs and alcohol, and not even necessarily hard drugs, but just sort of those like the numb out, like the escape, because they're trying to just not be emotional and not be this and not be that and blah blah blah, so just numb out.
And it just makes everything so much worse.
Yeah. Yeah, so one of the reasons I started BRED, the boys group, is because I saw a huge lack of male involvement in issues around sexual assault. Going to some sexual assault workshops and stuff, and really started questioning that, and really started questioning why it's so hard to get men in the room when this is affecting, you know, us just as much as it is affecting women sometimes, and we're perpetuating this, and why can't we have these conversations, and why can't we, you know, just talk and have a safe space for, you know, boys to talk or boys to, you know, listen. So I think, you know, just creating spaces where men can talk and not feel like they're going to get judged, or they feel like they can be themselves, I think is huge. I was telling Elkie earlier, that we're hopefully going to start an initiative working with coaches, kind of doing some trainings with coaches, because a lot of times we're seeing coaches, you know, being the biggest mentors to a lot of our students, and you know, if we can get coaches thinking more holistically about what it means to be a man and know what they're portraying to their boys, and I think we could start to move some stuff. And if we want to, you know, start, I always think if we want to start like moving the needle on rape and sexual assault and stuff like that, then we really do need to engage men. It's important. But yeah, we have gone over time, so I'm sorry, Ari.
You're good.
But if you all are interested in any of the work we're doing, you can sign up, leave your information back there. We also have these cards. We're doing a project that we started at the screening of Masculinity, on how you're going to promote healthy masculinity in Missoula. And if you have any ideas for us on how we can tweak this workshop, this is the first time we've done this specific workshop, so we're hopefully going to be tweaking it more and kind of building it up and getting it out there. So yeah, I appreciate you all coming.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Emma.
Okay. Understanding what you're trying to do here, but and you sort of touched on it that last moment, but there's definitely an underrepresentation of the gender at hand, right?
Mhm.
Talking about.
Mhm.
So, I don't know how we bring a little parity to things in that realm, but I think
Yeah.
that the conversation might be a little more lively in some ways.
You do it in a bar or a football.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah,
that
there is some truth, there is some
Yeah,
truth to that.
totally.
Though.
Yeah, I
You
think-
kind of have to go where
Well,
they
you're,
are.
you're also doing it during the workday.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that does make it
Yeah.
a little.
Yeah, that's
Well,
interesting.
and we like to think that, like, I think bring up a great point of the importance of meeting people where they're at. And I think that that's part of what Ben has been working really hard to do with his B-Rad clubs, and then thinking about getting into sports in places where boys are really congregating and have that audience. This was a first step to get to some of you all, so we're glad that you all came.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
I definitely agree that, I mean, a lot of just working in social justice in general, you go, like, me often, like, I used to be the only male in the room at our organization, you definitely do have to meet them where they're at, so, yeah, appreciate that feedback.
Is B-Rad a program through the YWCA?
It's through NCBI.
Through NCBI.
Yeah.
And where are you right now?
At Hawthorne and CS Porter. And hopefully we can get some funding and expand next year. But yeah, the need is definitely huge.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.